We are delighted to have with us today the former president of Latvia. I'm gonna mess this up. Valis Zatlers. Thank you so much for being with us. And a very good friend who has been at the Tbilisi conference before, the Foreign Minister of Lithuania, Linas Linkevičius. David Kramer will be moderating the conversation. If I could put one thing in your minds as we start this off. In 1999, at the Washington NATO summit, there was a lot of talk about what would be the next steps for the Baltic states in their aspirations to join NATO. And the feeling in 1999 was that it's impossible. They're too close to Russia, they're indefensible, it's going to cost too much. You know, we will put them on this track of the membership action plan, but we'll see where that goes. Within 2 years, when NATO started talking about enlargement, which finally was realized at the Prague summit in 2002, the whole discussion was turned on its head. It was impossible to conceive of the Baltic states not being included in NATO. If there was going to be any expansion at all, it had to include the Baltic states because they were the best performers. And I think that is the parallel that Georgia and NATO and the EU must all keep in mind now. What seems impossible today may seem like the only way possible a couple of years from now if we do our homework and do it right. So with that, let me turn it over to David Kramer to moderate and to our guests.
Great. Kurt, thanks very much. And Mr. President, a warm welcome to you for your first time here for this conference, I believe. And Mr. Minister, welcome back. You are a frequent guest here and you're always welcome. So thank you both very much. Let me start by asking each of you, for the Latvian, Lithuanian perspective, what was the key for your countries getting into NATO and the EU? What was it that mattered domestically, internally, and what mattered externally to make that happen? Mr. President?
Before making any decision,
Let's turn the microphone.
you had to turn on the microphone. Yeah? Okay. At first you had to turn on the microphone. Before making any decision, you have to look at the alternatives. And that's the thing what we forget very often. We say it's possible, it's not possible, but we don't look and discuss what's the alternative to definite possible or impossible process or action. And for us, the alternative was just to go back to Russia. Our alternative is still there, you know. If you talk to some, Russian politicians or diplomats, they will say, welcome back. We are waiting for you. But we usually calculate, and we did it also 30 years ago, and we calculated the only way back to freedom and democracy is to cut the ties with Russia and to be more integrated in the European Union and, of course, of NATO. And when the Russian politicians of that time say the West was not fair to us because they promised that the Baltic states will never be in NATO. And my answer is it's not the Western fault, it's Baltic states' fault because we decided ourselves. I think this is relevant to any situation here in Georgia too today. Basically, you have to check the alternatives and then you have to make the decision. And then it's important that this is a decision of a nation. And there are not a political, rivalry about who is for NATO and who is against, or who is for EU, who is against. We made a decision in the mid-90s, and I think this was the key to success.
Let me continue. First of all, I'm very happy and honored to be back in this conference. Also honored to be together with Valis Zatlers, President of Latvia, together here. We'll have some events, joint events later. Answering to your question, I can be more precise in saying that really was taking part since first steps of this integration process. And I remember that we were also discussing after the reestablishment of independence about way to go. And very first ideas were, it's not a secret, that Lithuania must stay neutral. That's the best way, neutral, peaceful. But very soon, the, so to say, discussion was very intensive, and I believe it was triggered also by the visit of NATO Secretary General Manfred Werner in 1992, when we started to discuss what are the options, as President said as well, what are our options? To stay neutral, not possible technically, physically, militarily, since we are really not so powerful, and we know that we are always in the midst of these big powers. So we understood very quickly that the only way is collective security, and the only way is NATO. And literally, it was fixed in '94, the very beginning, letter by the President to the Secretary General, that we wish to join alliance. And that letter was signed after agreement between all political parties, all spectrum of political parties in Lithuania. So short answer to your question, there will be a very strong, solid consensus since the very beginning. And when we made the choice, we never gave up, never. Always used all tools in the possession, what was provided. We were among first to establish mission to NATO. We were first in Baltic states starting peace operations in '94. I remember we now are celebrating this year 25 years of our participation in peace operations, which is also a big deal. Always like that. And that's also, you didn't ask, but let me say, always my message to our Georgian friends, never give up. Because your situation is psychologically a bit better because you were told since 2008 summit in Bucharest that Georgia will be members of NATO. Skeptics say God knows when, but we didn't know. But we were said that you will never be members of NATO. I was told personally, you will never be members of NATO. You are nice, your freedom fight is also very impressive, but look, be realistic, look at the map, it will never happen. And that was until 2000 almost. And only when it changed, the question was, paradoxically, it changed after 9/11 events in Washington and New York. Maybe it was in the context of change of mindset in the United States, when it was understood that fight with terrorism has no borders, important to accumulate all forces and join all, also to say countries, even small, are important. Those who are sharing the risks, those who are sharing the values, maybe, I guess, this was the reason. And this thinking was transferred overseas to Western Europe, which was always not very enthusiastic for enlargements. And that changed the stage. In 2001 and in 2002, I met, at that time, the Defense Minister of Russia, Sergei Ivanov. I remember we met and talked informally. It's not a big secret when I will disclose to you that he asked me, are you going to be members next year? It's 2002 summer. I said, no, next year, if everything will go nicely, we will be candidates and members in 2004. And he said, okay, it's understood. So that okay was not okay in official statements of Russia at that time. But the logic is, and the message to Georgians, never give up. If you made a choice, go ahead. If some problems are raising, don't blame anyone. Look at yourself. Are you doing well? Are you doing enough? It's always space for improvement. Don't be self-satisfied, you know, because even if you are front runners in some projects, doesn't mean that you are really perfect, and this is the main thing. And when time comes, be ready. If time will come, in our case it was 9/11, I said nothing to do with NATO, nothing to do with anything, but that was breakthrough, and we catch this momentum, and we made this step, which was decisive geopolitically, and for my country was very important. So when time comes, be ready, and if you will not be ready when time comes, you can blame just yourself.
Your two countries, together with Estonia, worked as a trio to pursue membership in both the EU and NATO. For an aspiring country like Georgia, while there's also an aspiring country like Ukraine seeking both NATO and EU membership, Moldova, while not pursuing NATO membership, is interested in deeper integration with the EU. What advice would you give to Georgia? Pursue it unilaterally, or is it better to pursue as a group of countries aspiring together?
Every situation is different, you know. Of course, singing solo is much easier than singing trio, but you see, the trio was our context. And the message was from the Baltic Way, when we shared our hands from 2 million people, you know, was very clear one, you know. We, despite we are very different ethnic structures, different religious structures, different, you know, social attitude, different communist parties, by the way, different national interests, but we were united around one very definite goal: freedom, democracy, free market economy. And you have to look for the window of opportunity. The window opens and most of the time it's shut. When the window opens, you have to do it immediately. You have to be prepared. And just to make it a little bit more, let's say, lovely atmosphere in this hall, I'll tell you a joke about, this is from reality. I asked one of the Russian high-ranking diplomats, we improved the relationship with Russia 2010, and I was the only president visiting Russia from the Latvian side on official visit in 30 years, by the way. I said, I understand it was a window of opportunity, but we Latvians were not opening this window, and we were not shutting this window. Why did you do? I asked the Russian. He said, we Russian diplomats are equally paid for opening the windows and for shutting the windows. You see, but again, I want to emphasize, the window will open one day, and you have to be prepared.
What advice would you give?
To do both, in short, to do everything. And yes, in our situation was a bit different. We had much more in common than different, although we were different, but much more in common, difficult to deny. In this situation, Georgia has everything: political promise, a package of support, commission, training, footprint, feedback mechanism. ANP is the same as membership action plan. Structurally, just bureaucratically, it's different, but formally, practically, it's no difference. And it's increasing and expanding. It was military committee meeting of NATO recently. In a month's time will be North Atlantic Council meeting, also here in Georgia. They are visiting. There's very intensive relations. So in general terms, all tools are used, and be it collective or individual. But as I said, membership is political decision, and when it comes, always not easy even to measure, like in European Union, we have more benchmarks to reach legislation, approximation. But here it's very political, and sometimes context not very prevailable, and you sometimes do not even not depend on you. But my answer, let's use all and just what Georgia is doing, basically.
So let me step back a little bit and ask each of you about the current times we're living in. It's a challenging period these days. In Europe, in transatlantic relations, I imagine the day after your countries became members of NATO and had security guarantees under Article 5, you probably slept very well that night. These days, when you go to bed, do you still feel safe at night?
I didn't expect you to come so personal and intimate,
Let's talk in broader country
David, as far as I know, you were more a real man. Now you're becoming philosopher. Just. Of course, I feel safe before sleeping. Of course. But when seriously, transatlantic relations are also undergoing kind of stress test now, and this is very serious. It's not funny at all. We have to take care about alliance which was created many decades ago. We just celebrated Jubilee. But the celebration was mixed with the warning signals that let's be serious about sustainability, not just about practical military means, but also value-based approach. And this is the case. And I believe equally importance from both sides of the ocean. Are we making right statements or messages? Are we making also right projects? And here much to be done. The good side of that, as far as at least my experience, after meeting in DC with both parties' representatives in Congress, I feel this continuity and I feel this, so to say, predictability, so to say. But we all understand it's not always the case. In Europe, also have to say self-criticism. Some initiatives. Let's put the example like European Army, right? Still discussed. Nobody discussed. By the way, it's interesting. Nobody seriously discussed this in official meeting. Because nobody understands, me as a former defense minister also do not understand what that means, first of all. But this is discussed, this focus spread, and full suspicions overseas. Same our military cooperation in PESCO. Structured military cooperation in European Union, it's not understood overseas. It felt like, duplication or whatever, which shouldn't be the case. Whatever we're doing in Europe, we must strengthen what we're doing in NATO. And it's not only politically, militarily, it's also with regard to the taxpayers' money, by the way. I can say for small Lithuania, it's not big difference whether battle groups will be used for European operation with European Union flag or NATO operation with NATO flag. If it's important politically for us, let's do that. So it's not competition. It should be same so to say, models, compatible, certified according equal procedures, in my view. But it's always temptation to have some autonomous thinking. Same, I believe it's very detrimental, even terminology, strategic autonomy. If you know, this is almost agreed language in our midst in European Union, but when you are just saying the title, also raising suspicions what that means. So we have to avoid, we have to mitigate and clarify, and this is task for both sides of the ocean, I would say, to make sure. So transatlantic alliance also undergoing stress test. I'm optimistic because we are doing always reaching some kind of decision all the time. Also, we have to be more serious on defense spendings. When it comes to criticism from overseas, it's rightly so. I can tell you that it's not new. Everybody now blaming President Trump that he said something, but it was said by President Obama, it was said by Clinton, it was said by Secretary Gates. I remember in Brussels, maybe Kurt, you were present at that time as well, I don't remember. It was a speech of Secretary Gates in Brussels, a very cold shower. And he told the guys, be serious, because time is over, comfort zone is over, be serious about your own defense. And I remember discussions, why he said this, and it was not understood. So let's be serious, let's share responsibilities also in this financial terms, and this is the case. So we really now facing challenges, what we will overcome, but we need efforts from both sides of the ocean.
So to depersonalize it, does Latvia sleep well at night?
I always sleep well because I like to practice the sleeping. So I'll divide into parts. That's about the EU. When people ask me, even the high EU officials say that, it's a threat for the European Union. It's a possibility that the Union will collapse. I say, it will never happen. 3 reasons behind that. The first one, the European project is older than me, and I'm already a retired person. So, it's too long. The second point, I was giving a lecture about the collapse of Roman Empire, and there were about more than 10 economic and political points why Roman Empire collapsed. No one is present or relevant to EU today. So, and the third point is, the strongest evidence of the strength of EU is Brexit. These guys tried their best for 2.5 years and they fail. If compared to the Commonwealth of Independent States, which is something of old Soviet Union, Georgia and Ukraine withdraw in 1 day. 1 sheet of paper, declaration, we are going out, and that's done. So EU, you have to take seriously. There are challenges, there are problems, Every time European Union has problems, it comes out of the problems stronger. From NATO, let's try to imagine that NATO is designed to collectively defend NATO territories, the territories of all the member states. And then we have to look where the threat comes from. From Mexico? I don't know. From Canada? I don't know. Then we look in the European part, what's the Caucasus, Georgia? We are friends. No? So what's left then? Maybe, Middle East, but I don't imagine, and I can't imagine that the Middle East countries will attack, NATO. It's impossible. So Switzerland, Austria, in the middle. They are safe because of NATO. Finland, Sweden, okay, they must join, but they are not a threat. And then what's left? Iran, maybe? I don't think so. They are very territorial. Old Persian Empire is a territory. And what's left? And be frank to us, ourselves. Russia. So we have to put all our efforts how to make the relationship with Russia in the future. And we have to do that, not Russians, because Russians are very satisfied with the situation we do have. They like uncertainty. They like conflicts.
Can I
Yeah,
just
go ahead, sure.
jump in with this remark on improving relations, you know? Sometimes asked, sometimes more often by Western media, what did you do to improve relations with Russia? Which is a very logical question and looks like fine, right? But I'm always saying what we should do in order to improve. Did we, so to say, occupy 20% of Georgian territory? Did we annex Crimea? Did we make Salisbury poisoning? Did we had frozen conflict in Transnistria? What did we do in order to improve? Okay, optional to close eyes, not notice, and that would be fine, exactly what they are seeking for. And for me, it's not acceptable. And now, by the way, again, another event, we all happy that military prisoners came back home. Everybody happy, definitely, they came home, finally. I made a statement saying that good, they are home, but it's a big price. It was immediately reacted by Foreign Ministry of Russia that all world celebrating and you are still criticizing. And I can tell this also looks like a story. Look, if somebody's stealing from you $1,000 and giving back $100, and you're happy that he's cooperative with you. So this is exactly the case, you know. Military sailors, they ought to be released after tribunal, UN tribunal on sea, law on the sea. They must release them because they were held, you know, they were not so to say, guilty for anything. Oleg Sentsov was forcefully given Russian citizenship and also was wrongfully, so to say, accused. And this is just example how we should really understand that we cannot create a new normal, closing eyes to what is happening on the ground. This is the case. And this is another factor which was not asked by you, but let me mention. This is something we must discuss about. We must discuss about the role of the country. By far, I'm not asking to be aggressive, nasty, you know, insultive. No, it's not about that. But let's be consistent at least. Let's be consistent ourselves. Let's respect what we decided ourselves. Otherwise, it will go nowhere. And this is really the case because other colleagues and neighbors, they're always having this testing policy. Same as with regard to Georgia, this borderization we recently again restarted. It was paused for some time, now again restarted. So it's escalating and at the same time testing whether somebody will say anything or not, international organizations. And by the way, I think sometimes international reaction is a bit too late. It's a bit too late as usually. So maybe these tests are proved to be worthwhile. That's my loud contemplation. So let's think together. Are we ready to take a clear stance to defend something? It's not just values, but also our positions in the future. Or are we just complacent and this is not the way to go?
So let me ask one more question to each of you, and then we'll open it up to the audience. Question for you, Mr. President, is about Russian money, which has a terribly corrupting impact, including on your country. If you could talk about that. And then, Linus, for you, how concerned are you about the possibility of a Russia-Belarus union? And what impact could that have on Lithuania?
Sure. Russians have a lot of what you call black money, you know. Most of the black economy gains black money. So that's a political principle, you know, of the Russian leadership. So we were, you know, a transport country for the Russian money laundering, and as well as, you know, financing, you know, different actions which were carried out all over the world, including military actions, and the finances went through our banks. Okay, there was an attack. I usually say it very frankly and directly, you know. There was an American attack on Latvian bank, and the bank was collapsed in 2 weeks, because if a bank doesn't have US dollars, there's no interest from money laundering from Russian side, you know, and they all took the money out, you know. Okay, it worked, but the problem is that we should look at this process on a larger scale. The money went to Austria, the money went to Germany, you know, and they were some signs that the Scandinavian banks are involved. This is a really octopus, you know, and we have to answer ourselves. If we kill the Russian money, we really save a lot of lives. Because when there was a conflict in Syria, you know, I was always asking in any conference, please, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, tell me where the money comes to fund the arms purchases, you know. They have everything, including in the most sophisticated weapons, you know. Somebody gives them money. If you cut the money, you know, you also cut the risk of conflict. Let's say in 60s, when I was a kid, you know, there were popular wars in Africa. They usually ended in 2 months because they run out of bullets. Today, the number of uncontrolled arms and weapons, sophisticated weapons all over the world is huge. And that's the latest today, we have to start to act against that. And okay, it's not good for Latvian economy because we did it in a sharp way. So to let's say, to restructurize the bank, you need at least 5 years. We had to do it in 6 months. It was pretty tough, but still I say, you know, we have to do that because we have to fight the global terrorism, and also we have to fight all these illegal actions Russia is funding in the European countries. You see, the far right and far left parties, they are ready to take the money from Russia.
Yeah, on this Belarusian-Russian Union, it was decided a couple decades ago. It's being implemented. It looks like it started to implement this integration, but it will never end probably. How long it will last, nobody knows. And lately we felt some pressure maybe from Russian Federation. How it's correct, it's difficult to say, but we should assess reality, how it looks like on the ground. And de facto, this country is very much integrated by all means, economically, energetically, they dependent very much. Security, defense, later exercises Zapad was a very clear indicator how they are well integrated. So de facto is the same country. Of course, we are not happy with that. To answer, is it concerned? Yes, it concerns us. This is reality. So we would like to do our best in order to help them to preserve as much as sovereignty as it is possible, if it is possible. And we'll try to approach this selective approach where we can really help them, but on the other hand, where we see something going wrong, we will react, be it human rights or political freedoms, or let's say this geopolitical project, nuclear power plant they're building 50 kilometers from Vilnius in violation of all rules and so to say legal basis. So this is also something not acceptable. So we will really try to do our best, but it's up to them to choose the way and the speed. So the reality is that we have enlarged neighbor with very long border, by the way. The Belarusians, 650 kilometers is really very long. It's our external border of European Union and NATO, and this is reality.
So we have time for one, and if it's short, maybe 2 questions out in the audience. Anyone have a question? Brian.
Thank you, David. Brian Whitmore, Center for European Policy Analysis in Washington. Just a very quick question to both of our distinguished Baltic guests. Baltic solidarity was instrumental in accession to both NATO and the EU. The same thing was true in the 90s with the Visegrad states, who cooperated very much with each other and successfully to get into NATO and the EU. Do you think this experience can be replicated in the case of, say, Georgia and Ukraine and perhaps Moldova now, or are these situations too different for the experience to be replicated? Thank you.
If I may, just short answer is yes, of course. It must be used in terms of European integration, or let's say not integration, approximation or getting closer. These 3 countries, association agreements were signed, the DCFTA also being implemented, different, so to say, conditions, some peculiarities, but they shouldn't be afraid, I can say immediately, that they will be packed somehow or be kept hostages of each other. It's not the case. Everything will be judged upon merits, but sometimes, or very often, this is the rule, that arguments which are jointly presented are listened more carefully. And if they, for instance, not to go too far and too long, just to say as example, now we are looking for the ways how to intensify cooperation with these three front runners, which are also different. Georgians, by the way, also the very much front runner, but I'm always saying not so many running, so don't be so happy to be front runner. So this is the case, but it's true. So nevertheless, now we're looking for the ways how to make it more intensive. And what I have in mind, getting closer to energy union, right? Getting closer to single digital market, getting maybe somehow associated with CSDP in European Union, connectivity projects, or something, or like roaming, for instance, would be tangible and visible, understandable for the people. Very important to find projects which would be understandable with simple people, but because of European integration, their lives becoming different, better quality. And the joint plea will be more impressive. So this is the example. So what is our advice to Georgian friends? Be together where it is possible. Come jointly with your arguments, and that's the case. But don't be afraid to be packed. This is that's upon merits, not about something else. About individual achievements, not about something else. And that will be judged upon the time.
Mr. President, last words.
I would say, geography matters. Somebody said economy matters, but geography matters a lot. Visegrad was a geographic group with the same historical sentiments, and the Baltics were the same geography with the same historical sentiments. You cannot put Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine in one basket. They're absolutely different. And they were put in one basket in Bucharest when let's say that was a mistake to say no for map for Georgia, but at the same time Ukrainians were not prepared. I was participating there on NATO Ukrainian Council. They were not prepared for NATO at that moment. They wanted, but they were not at least, have some roadmap what to do and not to do. And Moldova is a very special case, It still struggles with conflict. Transnistria is not a hot conflict, it's a frozen conflict, and that's a Russian army presence there. And they have this illusion about neutrality. I remember, 12 years ago in Heritage Foundation, somebody asked me, what is a Moldavian way? And I was an experienced politician, I just said what I thought. I said that the neutrality is impossible in that place. You should choose one side or the other side. And my advisor came up to me and said, Mr. President, you shouldn't take it publicly. I said, but was I wrong? He said, no, you are right, but don't say it publicly. So we have to say publicly most of the things, which are relevant to Moldova. They are still looking, and they have the sentiment of neutrality. Ukraine, it's one way, it's Europe and NATO, but difficult armed conflict with Russia in Donbass. And Georgia, you are in advance. Somebody in the morning said, you are in advance or are doing many things, But I would not put all these three countries in one basket. Different approach, very personalized approach, everybody sleeps well.
Well, President Zatlers, thank you very much first for your service leading your country, and thank you for your contributions here today. Minister Linkevicius, we expect you here every year now. You're a regular at the Tbilisi International Conference. But a special thanks to you, if I may, and I said some of this last year, but your leadership as Foreign Minister of Lithuania and within the EU and NATO have really been heroic, and particularly for Georgia and other countries in this region. So special thanks to you for everything you do. Please join me in thanking the President and the Minister.